welcome to video 6 of the Different Angle 3D video tutorial series. In this video we're going to concentrate on Object Mode and just go through some of the fundamentals that you need to know when you first start to set up scenes, introducing new objects, how to move around and scale objects. So it's just the basics of what you need to know in Object Mode. I'd just add that this is video number 6 in the series. If you haven't seen the previous videos, they are building in sequence, so I'd definitely recommend you go back and have a look at videos 1 to 5, especially 3 to 5, which have got some of the more important content about using Blender. Right, we'll get straight in and I'll open up a default window and we'll look at what happens. Okay, we're in Object Mode now, and you can see that when you open a default screen you've got the activated cube, and in the top left hand corner of the 3D window we've got the mode drop down, which is displaying Object Mode. You'll notice in the bottom left of the screen I've activated Blender's screencast keys so we can show the different shortcuts and mouse clicks that are used as we go through this small demonstration of working in Object Mode. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is the navigation, because if you navigate out of the view you've got to be able to get the view back, and one of the most useful things is being able to manipulate the viewport to where you want to look at the object. So on the top right hand corner of the 3D viewport we've got the navigation gizmos, and we mentioned them briefly in the quick overview of what's in the viewport, or what's in the workspace of the default scene. So we'll quickly look at the navigation gizmos, and you've got the 3D axis, which gives you the set scenes. If you click on any of the end buttons, the red x-axis, you can click on it again and it goes round to the other side of the x-axis. If you want to look at the front view, click on the y-axis, or click again and you go to the back axis, and the same with the Z view. You can look either the top or the bottom of the Z view by clicking on that, or clicking and dragging anywhere that isn't a hotspot but within the grey circled area allows you to pan the view to however you want to look at the view as a 3D view. And then below that we've got the zoom option, and you simply click on that icon, and while your mouse is over the icon, once you click and drag with the left mouse button you can zoom out or zoom in, and it acts directly on the centre of the viewport, so that's its centre of point of all these tools. The move icon is just allows you to pan the 3D objects around the screen, or take them out of view completely if you wish to, or even over onto another screen. The camera view toggles between what the 3D camera is seen, and the 3D camera, if we zoom out slightly, is within the scene. You've got the camera, the cube and the light. So if you click on the camera view you're looking directly through the camera rather than just a general point within the 3D view. And then the other option is perspective. Come out of camera view, you get the perspective option where you can set it to either orthographic projection or perspective projection. So those are your main navigation gizmos on screen, but if you're working in the bottom left hand corner on a model and you want to move the view, constantly moving your mouse up to the right hand of the screen can become quite tiring, and it's not the most efficient use of your time while you're modelling. So we can look at the shortcut key options that you've got as well, or just the general mouse options. So if you wanted to orbit around the view around the centre of the screen, then you simply press the middle mouse button and drag. And if you want to pan, then you press the shift button and middle mouse button and drag to pan around the screen. So that way you're not having to move your mouse off a long distance. You've also got some set views. If you wanted to look down the camera lens, like the camera option in the gizmos, you'd press numpad 0 and it takes you in, and it just toggle back out to normal view with numpad 0 again. And perspective view, you would just press numpad 5. So you go into perspective and press numpad 5 again to toggle out of perspective view back into out of orthographic view back into perspective view. The other set views are on the numpad. If you press numpad 1, you go into front view. Numpad 3, you go into side view, and the changes, you can see the axis change and also the axis rotation changes at the top. And top view is numpad 1. And you can then press Control 1 to take you to, Control 7 to take you to bottom view, or 7 top view, Control 1 to take you to the back view, or just numpad 1 to take you to the front view, or Control numpad 3 to take you to the side view, which would be the left hand side, I think, of the object, or just numpad 3 to take you to the right hand side of the object. Number 1. So there are your set views, and as I say, you can orbit with just pressing the middle mouse button down to orbit. You've also got the option of numpad 4. Each click will increment it to the right, or numpad 6, it'll increment a orbit to the left, and numpad 8 will increment an orbit top to bottom, and numpad 2 will increment an orbit from bottom to top. So there, your general sort of navigation methods within the 3D viewport, which should allow you to get to see an ideal angle or set view to model in. I haven't covered all of the view navigation options because there are quite a lot of them. But as you work through these tutorials and we get into the more practical elements, then we'll be bringing some of the others up. You've also got the option of going up to the 3D viewports menu and just clicking on view, and that lists all of the available options for what you can view. So as we talked about, the navigation, orbits, pans, zooms, and everything is there. And fortunately they give you the shortcut keys that you need to use if you want to learn the process of using Blender efficiently using the shortcut keys. The next thing we'll talk about is copying the default cube. You can use the standard across all programs Control C and Control V for copy and paste, and in this, if we go Control C to copy and Control V, you'll see the cube has changed from a yellow selected highlight to a red highlight, which means we've now got a new cube. If you look in the outliner, we've got the original cube, and now we've got a new cube called Cube 001 just sitting on top of the other cube, which means you have to then use another command to be able to move that cube around the screen. I'm going to escape and delete that with Control Z, so we're back to just the original cube in the outliner, because Blender offers a more efficient function, which is to duplicate the cube, and that's using the shortcut Shift D, because that places it already in the move command as soon as you've duplicated it, so you're not stuck with the object sitting exactly over the original one you're copying. And you have the option then of moving it on screen, and you can constrain it to an axis by, if you want to constrain it to the Z axis, you press Z and it will move up and down the Z axis, or if you want to constrain it to the Y axis, put it on Y, and you can constrain the distance by then adding after the the Y for the Y-axis command, adding a figure of, I'll say 3 meters, and it places it 3 meters away from the first cube. And again, we're talking about measurements from the object's origin, which is a small round circle in the center of the cube. So if I just left mouse button, select the cube again, and Shift D on the Y-axis and go -3. So we've now got 3 separate cube objects. The reason I've done duplicate before other things is to show you the select options. It's better to have more than just one item sitting in the screen. So we'll move on to select. We've already mentioned one method of selecting objects, which is the left mouse button click, which selects single objects. You can also select multiple objects by pressing Shift and left mouse button click, and you'll notice as we select, only one object maintains the yellow bright highlight around it, while the others keep an orange duller highlight. The yellow highlight signifies that that is the active object, and the active object is used a lot in Snap and also in positioning objects, because everything's moved relative to the active object center rather than the centers of the other 2 objects. So it's always worth remembering that the brightest highlight when there's multiple selections is the active object. And we also have a few other select functions, and you can select everything in the scene by pressing A on the keyboard, which is select all. And you'll notice that's now also selected the camera and the light, along with the 3 cubes that were selected using left mouse button and Shift. And to deselect everything, we press Alt A for deselect all. And there's a couple of other commonly used features with selection, and the first one is box select, and the shortcut for box select is just pressing B on the keyboard, and that gives you the option then to drag a selection box across the items. So box select will select everything, and it doesn't matter if I go back to Alt A and box select again, you don't have to be over the whole cube, just a small part of it. The next select option, just press Alt A to deselect everything, is to circle select the items, and that is simply pressing C on the keyboard to bring up the circle select, and then your left mouse button click over items. But when you click, you have to take the circle over the origins of the object, so you have to be over the little yellow circle before it will actually select. So if you don't go over the circle, you don't select it. If you go over the circle, you do. And C again. Escape takes you out of circle select. C and escape to select and deselect. There are a lot more select options, but they are the main ones you'll be using when you first get started. And again, you've got the select menu, which you can come up to, which gives you the shortcut keys for the different select options. There are an awful lot of, as with the view options, there's an awful lot more that you can make selections from, but most of the relevant ones when you're learning are the left mouse button select, Shift left mouse button, box select and circle select. We'll look at the transform options next. We've got these in the toolbar, so we'll go through that in a moment. First of all, I'll just delete the 2 extra cubes I added to show select methods, and I'll also add the transform panel, so we can see the numbers of the 3D locations, rotations and scale that are changing as we move the object around. Now, the transform options are effectively the move, rotate and scale. There's a few others to transform the cube into something else as well, but they're the main ones. So what you have to do to start with, before you can do anything, is select the object that you want to transform. We'll look at move to begin with. So we'll click on the cube to select it, and then to move it we have to first of all grab the cube, because they use G as the shortcut. So with the cube selected, press G, and then you're free to move it around the screen and place it anywhere you want to. And as you move it, you'll see in the top corner the X, Y and Z locations are moving relative from the object origin to the world origin. If I press Ctrl Z, just remove it back to the centre again. You also have the option of constraining the movement to an axis. So if you want to constrain the movement to the x-axis, you press, after the cube selected, you press G to grab the cube, and then you press X, and that gives you freedom to move it only along the x-axis. You can't move it anywhere else. So in that situation we moved it 5.0487. It's not a precise way of moving it, but it does constrain it to that one axis. And again, Ctrl Z for undo, because the next option is to constrain it a set distance, which is G to grab, X for the axis, and I'll go along 5 meters along the grid. So that sets it exactly to the dimension as you go along. The next option, using the shortcut keys with move, is to grab. So with the cube selected, is to grab the cube. This time, if we press Shift X for the axis, it constrains the movement to move on the Z, Y plane only. And you can't move it along the x-axis, it just moves along the plane that's perpendicular to the axis that you've pressed Shift to. So just press Escape on that and go grab Shift Z. You'll see the cube is now constrained onto the floor plane. It'll only move on the X and Y axis. So that's another method of helping you move an object. If you're building a scene and you've got a floor plane that you want to move something along, then if the floor plane is set parallel to the axis or two axes, then you can just move it along the floor plane without it raising off it. The other option is the widgets that you can use. The move widget opens up and has got the axis shown, so all you have to do is grab one of the handles on the axis. So if you grab the green Y axis, you can drag it along that axis. Just keep centering it up to make it easier. The Z axis you can move with the blue, and same with the X axis. You also have the option as you're moving along the axis as you move and grab the red handle and move it. If you type in number 5, you move it exactly 5 meters. So it gives you a precise way of working with the grab handles as well. And the same as we moved on a floor plane, you've got the option with the blue square handles. You work on the floor plane opposite to the colour of that one. So the Z plane means you're moving on the X and Y only, the floor plane, by grabbing the small square. And the same goes with if you grab the X, you can only move on the Y and Z axis. So that's the move widget. The next one I'll talk about is rotate, and we'll stay with widgets to start with. And the rotate widget gives you handles around the 3 axis now. This time you've got a circular handle, so you can just rotate it around the x-axis by grabbing the red handle and moving the mouse around with the left button held down. and recenter that up, and the same with the others, just drag around. And if you want to, you've got the option of dragging, so if I drag the Z axis and I wanted to move it 45 degrees, you just type in 45, and the cube has now moved 45 degrees on the Z axis, and you can see it on the rotation. And reset that to 0. So that's the rotation options. You've also got the white circle around everything, which is so you can rotate parallel to the viewport. So you're moving the rotation axis is perpendicular to what you're looking at straight down the viewport. You've got also, if I come out of the widget, the options to rotate is simply by pressing the R key as the shortcut. So that gives you the rotate, and just pressing R means you're rotating parallel to the screen, and whichever view angle you've got on the screen. You can rotate on the x-axis again, or you can even, as you're still within the rotate command and it's moving, you can press you want to rotate it 45 degrees and just left mouse button click to accept that rotation. So you've got exactly the same functions on the axis as you have for move, except you use R as a shortcut rather than G to grab it for move, R to rotate it. So centre that up. And the last of the transforms is the scale. And you get a very similar scale widget to the move widget, except you've got boxes on the end of the 3 axes. And it's just a matter of, if you grab a box and drag it, you scale on that axis. So if you want to scale, double the size of the cube as you drag in, press number 2, and it straight away doubles it from 2 meters square to 4 meters square. That doesn't quite seem right, but Control Z. Yeah, so you're at doubled its size by pressing 2. You've also got the option to scale it just on 2 planes. So if you want to scale it on the YZ axis, you would press the X axis as square that is separate from the axis markers, and this constrains the scale then to the X and Z. Control Z on that to bring the scale back down to 1. So there are your scale options using the scale widget. You've also got, if you look at the toolbox, there's a little triangle in the corner, which means if you hold your mouse with the left button down over that icon, it gives you a second option, which is the scale cage. And this gives you options where you can scale and just drag out on one side, so you're actually just moving one side of it. So you'll see as it moves, you're actually moving the origin as well as you're scaling along. So it's no longer scaling central to the original position. Control Z that. You can see the origin's gone back now to its normal location. And you can drag out the corner markers to increase it. And that means it's moving from its furthest point from the corner marker. And these sidebars will drag it out from the corner. So it gives you a different option to scale. So you're not constrained to scaling from the centre point with the scale cage. And if we just come out of the transform widgets, you can also scale with the shortcut keys by pressing S as the option and dragging out to drag it larger or smaller, or you can press S, scale it by a factor of 2, and it will double the size of the object. So those are your scale options. What has happened is you've used a scale factor of 2, and we'll talk more in edit mode because there's some conflicts between scaling in object mode and scaling in edit mode as to the dimensions of the lines that the object is made up of. That's one for the next tutorial. but again, return it to its actual size. So that covers the basics of the transform. You've also got the options in the menu to activate them from there as well. Up to now, we've just looked at what you can do and had a default cube in the screen. Blender gives you options for a number of mesh primitives that you can start your models from. And they are really only the basic building block. The only thing you need when you start a new model is the origin. And it possibly helps to have a vertice or two to start building from rather than just creating new ones within the project. So the other options are available in the Add menu, and the Add menu you activate by pressing Shift-A. And that brings up a whole range of different options that can be added. I'm only interested at this stage, very early stage, is mesh modelling. You can move on to the other areas, and I'll just quickly run through, because curves are Bezier curves, very much like you use in Inkscape for doing vector drawing. Gives you a lot of fine control over curved logos or other items that you're making where you want to have much smoother curves that you can get pushing vertices around. Surfaces and NURB surfaces, not very well developed, but they give you a much more mathematically accurate surface than you can achieve with a curved surface. Metaballs are almost like working with Mercury, where they maintain a volume but work into each other, and it's much easier to show when we go into the more advanced tutorials later on. Text objects are useful for adding text if you're doing any technical drawing and you want to annotate anything. And volumes, grease pencil gives you a 2D drawing ability within the 3D. Armatures are for building skeletons within animatable people. Lattices deform meshes around the shape of a lattice that you build. It possibly doesn't mean much as I'm talking through it, but what the points I'm trying to make is there's an awful lot in Blender that over time that you'll find you'll become easier to learn as you go along. But what carries over from mesh modelling, the transform moves of scale, rotate, move and what have you, all follow through to the different areas. So while you learn in one area, it's much quicker when you get into the next area because you carry through on the same methods that you do for mesh modelling almost. So we'll look at the mesh primitives. We've got a cube in the scene at the moment, but you can add any of these others as standard, and you can add your own primitives as well using different add-ons, or there's a whole range of different primitives that you can add on later. But these are the main ones to get started. I'm first of all going to delete the cube. So to delete a cube, you can either press the delete key on your keyboard. I'm going to Control Z and go back and put the key back in, or you press X. And the reason you've got these is the shortcut keys are much closer to where your left hand sits on the keyboard. So rather than having to reach across to the delete button, you can just press X and take the option for delete. It's far more efficient in doing so. So we'll then press Shift-A to bring up the Add menu, and I'll put a plane in. So the plane comes in at 2 meters square, and when you add a new object into the scene, you get an option in the left-hand corner that comes up. If you expand that by pressing the small triangle, it gives you the options that you can change when you initially add an object into the scene. So you could put it in a different location, 5 meters away from where it was originally placed, and it's always placed on the 3D cursor, which we'll talk about in a minute. You can change the size of the object to whatever size you want, so we'll go in at 6 meters for the size of it, and you can change the rotation of it, or you can align it. At the moment it's aligned to the world axis. You can align it to the view. So if we click align to view, it's now put in parallel to the viewport rather than lying on the world axis, and it always goes in on the world axis so that Z is facing the same direction as the world's coordinates. So the Z-axis on the world, so that the plane's sitting on the X, Y plane made up from the XY axes. So that gives you options that you can change initially, but once you come out and make a different command, you then lose that control. You've put the object in at that size. So I'm going to go Control Z and just delete that out. So we've come back to just that and add a different option. And you've got the cube, plane. A circle is literally just a circle of vertices and edges. There's no face in the middle. It's not filled. But you've got the option, if you want to, of filling it with an n-gon or a fan triangle. That won't mean anything until we go into edit mode and start talking about that. But you can have just a circle rather than a plane. And again, change its size, its location. Yeah, sorry, that's the number of vertices that make up the edge, which is an edit mode thing, but its radius, you can change its size, its location within the screen. And again, once you come out of that, you lose the options to change it, and then you can edit it, or you can use the move command to move it, scale command to scale it, and go into edit mode and completely change its shape. I'll just delete that with the X. Oh, sorry, it's not selected at the moment. X, delete. And some of the others, Control add. I'll not go through all of them. The useful ones is the UV sphere gives you a world, and if I just I won't change that. If I just up its size in the screen, you can see it's made up of quads, 4 vertices, 4 edges and a face, all pieced together to build up effectively a globe with a north and south pole on it as it sits in the world coordinates. We'll just delete that out, and you've got, which I think I used in one of the earlier videos, the monkey, which is useful just for demonstrating the different sides of an object, because every view is different that you get with the monkey. So they're your mesh primitives, and they are added at the 3D cursor. Now, the 3D cursor, we've got an option to click and move the position of the cursor. And if we go into view on the transform panel rather than the tools in the view, you can actually add the cursor at specific locations, and you can rotate the cursor as well to match the view that you're looking at, because we've now put the 3D cursor in at an arbitrary viewport view. The rotation of the cursor is different. We can use the various menus that we'll go through in future tutorials. Shift S is the snap menu, and we can put the cursor back to the world origin, so it goes back and it's aligned itself again with the world's origin, or we can locate it manually. X-axis 5 meters, so it's moved 5 meters along the x-axis. I've just zoomed out too far to see where it was. And it's the location of the 3D cursor where you add objects. Shift add, mesh, cube. So wherever that's located in 3D space is where a new object will be added. It becomes a very powerful tool within Blender's arsenal when you want to move and snap objects to very specific places, rotating objects as well. If we take the cube, and we've got the origin of the cube in its centre when it's first put in the scene. If I go into Shift S to the snap menu, and again snap the cursor to the world origin, sorry, Shift S, cursor to the world origin, so the 3D cursor is sitting on the world origin. Now, when we rotate, as it is at the moment, we've got the rotation, the transform pivot point set to medium point. So if we rotate the cube, it rotates around the medium point. If we set that to the 3D cursor, we can now rotate the cube around the 3D cursor. So simple things like this can make a massive difference to how objects are placed and positioned as you're modelling, and you will build a knowledge of how to do this over time. May seem a little strange at the moment talking about it like this, but it will become much more understandable. I'm just going to press Shift S again to bring up the snap menu, and this time I'm going to snap the selected object to the cursor, so it puts the cube back on the centre point because we've put the cursor on there. And it's these sort of snap operations that can become very powerful. There's also the option to move the origin, and so if I again grab and move the cube, and we'll move it on the x-axis 5 meters, and if we move the origin, set origin to the 3D cursor, now when we're in the medium point as the pivot, rather than the object origin being in the centre of the cube and it spinning around the centre of that, it now rotates around the new position of the origin. Not at all referencing the position of the vertices or faces that the cube is made up of anymore. It's outside them. But the positioning of the object origin and the 3D cursor becomes an extremely powerful modelling aid as you get into much more complex things. Even though Blender's got a lot of primitives that you can add to building your models from, you don't really want to be constrained from having to build models every time you open a Blender file and start from scratch. So they give you an option called Appending, which allows you to bring a Blender model from a different blend file. There are other import methods that we'll possibly talk about in future tutorials, but I'm just going to mention Append. And what this does is allows you to bring in a model from either a Blender file that you're using as a library with lots of different models in, or just from specific Blender files where you know there's a useful model that you can reuse in the Blender scene that you're building at the moment. So you click on Append. I'm just going to quickly go through. It's a file browser type operation. I've put a house tutorial model, and I'll append that in to the scene. When you go into Append, you choose the file you want, and it gives you a number of options within that file that you can bring into the scene, like the camera setup, or if you've got specific images in there, you can bring those images into the new Blender file, or the materials if you've made a specific one. But we're looking at just the object, because that will bring in the object and any materials that have been created with that object. So I'm going to click on Object, and that opens up the different objects that are within the scene. And I'm going to click on the house and append it into the file. At the moment, the house is sitting directly over the 3D cube. The idea of this model was to be a very basic demonstration and a practical exercise within my book, Modelling Methods, Principles and Practice for Blender 2.8, to show how the basic methods of starting with a primitive and turning it into something more useful. What I'll do is just hide the cube and then select the house. So we've got the house model now brought in, and it's not very detailed. I'm going to tab into edit mode just for a second to see how the cube has been altered from just 8 vertices, and it's been cut and inset and changed to form the house, and the book goes through the process of how you can create this, and it also goes through how you can model, and you can change the scene view. The shortcut for that is Z, and if we go into material preview, it will actually apply the image textures to the model. Very easy introduction to your first stages with Blender. It's well worth if you're looking for getting an advanced knowledge on what we're doing in these tutorials in a little bit more detail. It's all included in the book. But from that you can very quickly build a scene just by duplicating the house, Shift D on the X-axis and just moving it along, Shift D, X, move it along. So we've appended it in and we've started to build a street of houses straight away. Shift A to add a plane. I'm going to move it, grab Z minus a meter, which puts it at the bottom of where the original cube was, which is what we used, what the house is based on. And you can then just scale the plane up as a ground plane. Very quickly you can build scenes up in object mode. It's just a very quick demonstration. That house, rotate 90, escape, rotate Z 90, just changes things around slightly. But a very quick introduction to object mode, going through all of the various, or the more obvious move, rotate, scale, transform options, pivot points, and appending your own models or models that you found on the internet into the blend file. Well, hope you found that interesting. One of the key features in Blender is that what you learn in one window type or one mode tends to carry over to the other modes. So while we've looked at move, rotate, select, scale, all those functions in object mode, they're almost identical functions when you carry out those in edit mode. And that's what we'll be looking at in the next video, is the fundamentals of working in edit mode. So we'll be looking at vertices, edges, faces, and the similar move, rotate, scale functions that we carry out when we're actually creating models rather than just moving them around and setting a scene. As I said, I hope you found it interesting, and if you did, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you know when the next videos will be out. Thanks again for watching, and see you soon.